So pleased to have my dear friend Amanda Kuda back on the podcast. Amanda, how are you doing today?
I am doing so good. Thank you so much for having me, Karolina.
Okay, well, listeners, Amanda was on the podcast. I cannot remember the number, but episode 20 to 30, somewhere around there. She came on to talk about sober dating, and now she is back with her brilliant book that is coming out this week that we are going to urge you to get. But Amanda, can you refresh my listeners' memory? Tell us a little bit about your story and how you got involved in this work.
Yes, absolutely. So I think the important thing to point out is there's not anything really exceptional about my story and my relationship with alcohol. I was a normal run of the mill average social drinker. And I started drinking when I was in my late teens because I really didn't feel like I fit in with my peers. I felt like I kind of had this different way of approaching the world, that I had a little bit of a more like mystical spiritual side that I didn't know how to quite integrate into this teenage life that I had in a Midwestern small farm town. And I desperately wanted to fit in with my peers. And so I found that drinking and partying was an easy way to do that. And I carried that into my 20s and really, embodied what I like to call the Carrie Bradshaw lifestyle, which this was not in New York, let's be clear. So it was my own version of it, but as close as I could get to the glamorous, like big city C&B scene, work hard, play hard lifestyle. And I did that throughout my 20s, never with any real consequences, never with any rock bottom, only to get to my early 30s and realize that something felt off. Something didn't feel quite right. I wasn't depressed, but I also wasn't happy and fulfilled. And as I started to kind of step into some self-help and some spirituality work, I kind of kept getting pointed back to the same path. And that path was to stop drinking. And I thoroughly did not want to do that because I had built so much of my social life around drinking. And I really truly believed that everything would fall apart. I'd become a complete and total loser. I'd have no friends. I'd be undateable. And I just really had a lot of fear around what that would look like for me if I quit drinking. But after several months, if not a year at least, of trying to do the moderation thing, I just was exhausted. And so I decided to take some time off, and that time kept growing and growing and growing. And somewhere along the way, I met you and a whole bunch of other wonderful people, and it just made sense to not go back. And the life I've created now is truly a life beyond what I could have ever dreamed of. And I now quite unexpectedly, am a coach in this space, have written a book on sobriety. And it's just like a very important part of my lifestyle because I believe it's what created the foundation for me to become the me that I was meant to be.
Mm. Well, I love how you even preface that because, I share my story very similarly in the sense of like, this is how normal and relatable it looked like, because I feel
Mhm.
like it's so easy in our society to like typecast people and just be
Yeah.
like, oh, well, you had to do that because you were, running amok and getting into trouble over here,
Right.
right? And it's like, no, 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 no. Like, like open our ears. We all have drinking habits unless you grew up under a rock. And it's like, is there a point in an intuitive woman's life where we get to reevaluate it no matter what it looks like? You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And I think that
Yeah.
really opens the door to that by like starting to paint your story as this was all super normal and nothing to really write home about.
Yeah, absolutely. And there, you don't have to have anything exceptional about your relationship with alcohol to want to change it. And that's what I really love about the space that has been created within the past 5 or 6 years that we're a part of, that really allows you to investigate that relationship and change it with void of a problem or any sort of like precursor that came up that made you need to change.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as you share in your book, so the book is called Unbottled Potential, coming out this week. I read my copy in literally one sitting. So it's that good. You talk a little bit about personas and these different like personas or masks that we wear. And I think it's so interesting to have this conversation because you and I are about the same age range and our kind of drinking. And when we stopped drinking was around the same time too, like by a year or two. So it's like, I feel like we both grew up with this heavy alcohol persona, and it was really, a tool that we used to, become more confident, make more friends, have a social life, all these kinds of things. And it's just so interesting how like becoming more of an authentic version of you and really stepping into who you were meant to be means like stripping that away. And maybe alcohol did serve a purpose in your 20s, but it's like, but does that still serve the purpose that like the 30 version or 40-year-old version of you is meant to step into? So tell me a little bit about your past personas and how you've been able to find more authenticity and really find yourself in an alcohol-free life.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. This is actually one of the most important parts of my journey because I was blissfully unaware that the version of myself that I was putting out into the world was not authentic until someone called me out on it. And I tell this story in the book that a guy I was dating basically just says, like, I feel like everything that you do, our conversations, I feel like you're being very calculated. And he didn't mean it as an insult. It was actually this like loving gesture he was offering me. And as I sat there and thought about it, I realized, yeah, I'm a people pleaser. I'm a someone who is very empathic and can chameleon myself to be whatever I need to be to fit in and be the most acceptable, likable version of me in any environment. And I think that so many women can relate to this sense of, molding and bending ourselves to where we elevate these parts of ourselves that are most socially acceptable and kind of quiet down the parts that aren't in order to make the people around us more comfortable or in order to be cool or good or popular or, monetizable in the things that we're doing. And the more that I looked at that, the more that I realized, wow, yeah, the job that I chose was because I thought that it was a good, reliable job where I could climb the ladder and get money. The way that I'm interacting with my friends is because I saw this as what is cool and popular. The way that I'm acting around men is what I'm doing in order to be most likable. And I had completely abandoned some of the most unique and true parts of myself to the point that I didn't even know what those looked like. And that was a very scary and humbling experience. And I have a lot of women reflect the same language back to me that I don't even know what I like. I don't know what my hobbies are. And I don't know what my interests are because for so long I've just been doing what everyone else was doing. And what better way to get sucked into that kind of herd mentality than with alcohol? And alcohol really just kept me stuck in that. And when I finally surfaced and came out, what I realized was I wanted to do something else with my career. And I probably always had that I didn't really want to stay in some of the friendships that I was in because they weren't as connected and supportive. And then I've been dating completely the wrong type of guy just because that's what had been available to me. And so many of these things changed. But I think that the biggest piece of that puzzle that came out in my authentic journey was deciding to step onto a more spiritual path, which had always been um, something I was interested in. I was always kind of like a witchy little kid, but I grew up in the Bible Belt. And so it was hellfire and brimstone Christianity. And you did what the Bible said in this very specific way, or else you were wrong. And I think stepping into this more accepting form of spirituality was really a piece that helped me step into my authenticity. And all of those things combined just made for a happier, more easeful life because it was being myself.
Yeah. It's so incredible to see that and to see that growth that happens like with the age of like I mean it's really I think hard to find very actualized, very authentic versions of people in their 20s just because of
Mhm.
how hard that decade is of,
Yeah.
coming into adulthood and trying to like you said chameleon to everyone's expectations. But it's truly like a symbol of so much like growth and bravery to really like wear your own skin and figure out even what that is and like really own your own desires, your own values, your own likes and dislikes and all that kind of stuff. And so I think it's just such an interesting conversation. Like to me, it's not really about the alcohol. It's like the mechanism to find yourself at the end of the day. And so, what's so interesting, I think, about this book is that it's not really just for people who might, consider like alcohol as something that they need to look into, right?
Mhm.
It's so much more of an invitation of like, how could you develop yourself even more spiritually and emotionally without alcohol in your life, really for anyone, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what has that looked like for you? So like, we're using these words a little bit like spiritual development. Like what has
Mhm.
that looked like for you to remove the alcohol and really dive deep into like who you were meant to be and that spirituality that you've been referencing?
Yeah, I was trying really hard to do it when I was still going out and partying. Like, I mean, if there's video, but you can see behind me, I have stacks and stacks of books that I have read and handfuls more that I have listened to or rented or checked out on my Kindle. I mean, I was doing what on the outside looked like the work of personal growth and development. I had, I was learning about fitness and nutrition. I was learning, I was going to therapy. I was developing routines, my morning and evening routine. I was reading spirituality books and learning how to pray and meditate and journal. And I was learning about, our inner child and our shadow and all of these things, but it didn't really sink in when I was drinking. Like I got it, but I didn't get it. And so what happened when I took alcohol out of the way is all of a sudden, all of these practices where I'd been kind of like ticking the box, all of a sudden started to sink in. And my meditation, and I'm a person who needs like a guided meditation. I am not this like expert, like go sit for 2 hours on a hill meditator. But even just the experience of meditating and praying and journaling and exploring my inner world and communicating that inner world to other people became easier, and it made sense. And I think anyone who has gone on this journey will understand that experience of all of a sudden these things that you were doing or hearing about start to click a little bit more. And that's what it felt like for me. Like the things made sense, and I saw now how they worked and could experience how they worked versus just like going through the motions of closing my eyes and trying to meditate or saying a prayer. It was this felt sense of, I actually felt like I was connecting to something beyond my physical sight that I was only like hoping was there before. I could just feel it now. And that felt really good. It feels really powerful to, not have to worry about everything on your own. And that's what, spirituality looked like for me. But even just something as simple as therapy became more tangible. And I started to be able to express myself more clearly in therapy and work through some of the problems with less resistance that were coming up in my life. And I think that's really special. Like, no matter what way you're going to improve yourself, if you're doing it with a clear head, it's going to be easier and more effective. Well, I won't say easier because there's still hard parts about it, but it's going to be more effective.
Yeah, of course. I think that our stories are so aligned. I was definitely getting into health and mindfulness like the last like 4 or 5 years as a drinker.
Hmm.
And I would still say I was still brushing the surface, but I was learning about all these new concepts like chakras and meditation and yoga and healthy eating.
Yeah.
And there was like, I think a quest to like maybe not fix myself is not the right word,
Hmm.
but like a quest to attain that happiness that I definitely didn't have back then,
Yes.
right? And I would have almost argued back then that like nothing works, like none of this
Yes.
works, right? Because
Yes.
it's
Yep.
like the core, like bigger issue was alcohol was really blocking it all. And then you
Hmm.
remove that alcohol, and not only does it all click, but then you go like way deeper than you were ever going before
Yes,
and actually get to the
exactly.
root of your healing and growth and all those kinds of things. So I'm so curious if you've ever been in spiritual communities or events or just like people on the internet that still really maintain like a drinking lifestyle. Like what are some of your like arguments or philosophies about how those two things just don't really commingle?
Oh, totally. I live in Austin, which is a really interesting melting pot right now of um a very like woke kind of community of spirituality and a lot of spiritual jargon thrown around. And not that some of it isn't right, but there's a lot of people who are like cosplaying spirituality that I run and run into here and there. And there's definitely like a lot of drinking and even like psychedelic use that I am confronted with. So there's a lot of example of what it looks like. And that's what I was doing. I was cosplaying spirituality back in the day. I was, like this woke woman on during the week reading all of these spiritual texts. And then on the weekends, I was cutting loose and I was trying to integrate these two lifestyles in the name of balance. But what I found is that when you are trying to be on the spiritual path, the ways in which you can communicate spiritually, the first is with your own inner intuition. And the second is with a spiritual power that's beyond your physical sight, whatever you want that to look like or be called. And I certainly could not tap into my intuition as a drinker. That, it's a voice you're always connected to, but I describe it as, it's the difference between being on a 1990s flip phone in a tunnel and trying to get cell service, or being on a state of the art iPhone next to a cell phone tower. And when I was drinking, I was in the tunnel with the flip phone. Like I knew there was a connection to be made, but it was really like crackly and didn't really quite make it. And then once I lifted that veil and I was on the state of the art phone next to the tower, I was like, wow, this actually feels easy and really good. And I think that that's how we can, that's how, the level of shift we can experience when we go from drinking and trying to have the best of both worlds, or trying to have balance, and actually just committing to a more spiritual, enlightened, open, and connected lifestyle, is just the level of connection you're able to get.
Yeah, that's incredible. Well, I'm under the belief system that like each generation, and hopefully this is just in terms of progress and growth, that each generation is going to become even more aware and more
Mhm.
conscious. And, maybe we'll have some slips or turns or whatever in future decades, but like that's hopefully the point of life, is that
Yeah.
we always get to evolve and things like that. So with that being said, I'm curious, like, what is your outlook? Like, how do you think the spiritual and or like health worlds are going to change in future years? Like, what do you see happening in the next like 5 decades when it comes to like alcohol in our society?
Mm. I think that we've even seen, from the time that you and I have been, alcohol free, Carolina, a massive shift in the movement, because when we both started this journey 6, 7 years ago, there was AA, or there were some non traditional approaches to recovery. And then there were the renegades, which I would say, like, we are part of that crew. I've never described myself as that, but the people just saying, oh, by the way, you could just stop drinking. And that was a really novel conversation a handful of years ago. And just with the mixture of the things that are happening, in terms of, we had this really interesting period of time where we were all secluded to our homes. And that was kind of a great awakening for a lot of people. Either they realized, wow, I haven't been really satisfied with my relationship with alcohol, and now is a pivotal time because the social pressure is off. Or they realized, oh, hey, I just really doubled down on my relationship with alcohol and this isn't quite sustainable. Plus, we have this new, for better or worse, visibility with TikTok and Instagram and all the other social media platforms, where people can share their opinion and experience, and people are becoming more free with sharing their personal lives out in public. And it gives us this sense of, oh, I'm not the only one. And so as we continue to have more access to this kind of information, and people just sharing a little more openly and boldly and authentically, um, I think that it's going to continue to encourage people to shift their ways of thinking and being, and realizing that they don't have to keep doing all of the things that they were sold as the only way or the best way or the normal way. And that's with alcohol and with spirituality and with personal growth. Like, it's all just becoming so much more accessible. And I mean, as much as you and I both have probably have some similar feelings about staring into our phones, it's also really helpful for a lot of people to have that as an option. And I think it's just going to advance and accelerate the message, and hopefully in a really positive way.
Yeah. I feel the same way about entrepreneurship, like because of my values are so aligned with like freedom and being my own boss and
Mhm.
traveling and stuff, that like my brain can't compute like why people would have
Yeah.
a 9 to 5 job. And obviously some people have different values. So it's not like
Mhm.
a judgment system or anything like that. But if
Yeah.
someone wants that freedom, I'm like, it's 2023. Like you can do it. I promise you, it's available
Yes.
to you. You know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, that consciousness just goes up, and just the curiosity of like what would happen if this was possible. I'm super curious. So you called yourself a renegade, and we both consider ourselves people who don't drink but aren't in recovery per se.
Mhm.
Do you ever ruffle feathers in the traditional like recovery world or more traditional viewpoints on alcohol? And how do you go about that?
I have not as much as I probably will, as this book comes out, just because I am being, I'm going to increase the number of people who are seeing my message. But I definitely, strangely enough, the only haters I've had on social media, through the past 6 or 7 years, have been people who say, this is really dangerous. Why don't you just admit that you had a problem, because you could help so many more people? And this kind of language, like 12 steps or recovery is the only way. Why don't you just admit it and do it? And I think very opposite, which is that, if we were to look at the drinking spectrum as a Venn diagram, the overlap of people who quote unquote have a problem and normal drinkers, it's not big, like circles on each side. It's the center part that's the big part. The people who are in the gray area, or the people who have normalized drinking habits, are actually the majority of drinkers. And so with people like you and me, we're actually giving a permission slip to this greater population that maybe isn't on one of the extremes, but also could very well get to that darker extreme if they didn't have someone to reach out, hold their hand, and encourage them. And I think that the work that we're doing is so important because it's allowing people to have a solution before there's a problem, you know? And yeah, the only people who I've really, and it's not everyone, because there are some amazing people who are just like, the more the merrier, whatever route you take to sobriety is the greatest. But of course, there are some people who really dig in their heels because that was the path that saved their life. And I have to like super respect, like they cherish that with um, such fierceness that they bite back. And I try not to take it personally because I understand that, geez, like you are just fighting for the thing that saved your life. And I hope that someday you can see that I'm, doing the same, just with a different approach. But yeah, I've definitely had some of that. And it feels uncomfortable, doesn't it?
For sure. And, I think that's so telling too about like, basically it's prevention. And that's kind of how I make sense of it in my mind.
Hmm.
If like I feel under attack or just there's like different points of view, is that like we're talking to different people at
Yeah.
different stages, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
And so like wouldn't it be better that more people had more consciousness, more awareness, more decision making, more introspection around their relationship with alcohol before it got to that stage? Or even if it will never get to that stage, like before it just becomes like a rote habit for the rest of their life that they never ever look into ever again and just die with that apathy and all the things that they just like
Hmm.
shove under a rug, I think it can only help. But definitely there's like that. I think it's changed a lot in recent years. When we
Hmm.
started many years ago, it was a little bit more black and white and that kind of respect and stuff like that. And do you ever get that, like about like the 12 steps being spiritual and you're talking about spiritualness? Like, do you ever get kind of like why don't you, like you said,
Yeah.
why
Why
don't
don't you just, yeah, why don't you just do this? I have had a couple of people like, um, why don't you, what you're saying is not so different from the 12 steps. And that's fine. But it's all semantics, right? So if the language that I use resonates and the language that 12 steps uses does not, doesn't matter. As long I think that, okay, there is some danger in that because of course someone could do this in a very dangerous way, but I approach the work that I do with a lot of integrity and with a really high moral compass. And so I know that if I choose words that would have resonated with me, that I'm going to reach someone else who those words will resonate with. And full disclosure, I was very, very adamant in the process of writing my book and developing my teaching process that I specifically didn't dive too deeply into any of the other modalities, including like I have a whole row of Quit Lit books behind me on my credenza. And I did not read or finish any of them until I finished my own work because I wanted to be really clear on the process that was mine. And guess what? Have you read Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert?
yeah.
Right. So she has this concept that, ideas are out there just like floating in the ether. And many of us have shared ideas. And there's certainly going to be points of overlap in my book, in your book, in my book, in any of these books behind me, and my book and the 12 steps or the big book. But that is the beauty of our world as well, is that there are these shared ideas floating around coming into consciousness. And sure, my ideas might not be so different from the perspective of 12 steps. I think that the way that I teach is not as specific to one god or religion though, and maybe that's what offers like a little more openness to it.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Hmm.
So tell us a little bit. We've talked about lots of themes that have come up in
Hmm.
your book, but tell us more a little bit like what the book is about in your perspective, like what the bigger philosophy is and what you hope readers get out of it.
Yes. So I really wanted to write a book that felt different from some of the other books on sobriety that were out there. And again, doing it a lot blind in order to get to that point. But I really wanted it to be a book that was focused on possibility and potential, of course. And my whole belief is that sobriety can be the foundation to living a more fulfilled and more actualized life. And that could be in the way that you express yourself and work through emotions. That could be in the way that you just fulfill your everyday dreams and desires and find hobbies and find your most authentic self and set personal goals. That could be in the way that you express yourself in your spiritual connection or in your relationships or in your friendships or in your career. And I've just found that each of those aspects of my whole holistic life have transformed and changed for the better, and that there are specific ways in which my relationship with alcohol and the ways that I thought about myself and what I was capable and deserving of changed fundamentally when I stopped drinking. So it was really easy for me to make the connection in the ways that alcohol was robbing me of self-confidence and how that was bleeding over into every other area of my life. So the book is really intended to help anyone who has big dreams, big goals, or wants to live a better life and happens to have some priority placed on alcohol. It's just a permission slip for them to say, hey, what could be possible if I took this thing out of my life for a while or for a long while? And I hope it really inspires people on any end of the spectrum of their relationship with alcohol to reconsider how it might be holding them back or keeping them small, and encourage them to be their biggest, most fulfilled self, because I think the world will just be a better place if we allow for that.
Well, amazing message. I fully stand behind it and believe it
Yes.
100%. And there's just so many interesting, scenarios that you tackle in the book as well, like a lot of the objections that people have. And something that you just seem so masterful of is cultivating like really wholehearted relationships in your life. So first, let's talk about friendships, and then we'll talk about dating a little bit more. But like, what has this change looked like for your friendships? And like, how does someone who wants more authentic, more wholehearted, more growth oriented friendships, but feels maybe just stuck into their status quo locality kind of friendships or whatever, how would they even go about like finding women who vibe more on their level, I guess you could
Yeah.
say?
This is a really scary conversation because a lot of us have these friendships that we have kind of nostalgia with, right? Because we do have that long time relationship with people, and we've never really investigated, is this relationship built on vulnerability and connection, or is it built on the fact that we just happen to, like you said, locality, live in the same place or have some of the same hobbies or have crossed paths and just kept those paths crossing throughout time? And that doesn't mean that the friendships that you have are bad or wrong, or that you have to ditch your friends or dump them, but it does mean that you have to be willing to allow those friendships to evolve and change and grow with you, and have the faith that they can and will do that, and also have the faith that you're capable of attracting and making new friends, even if you live in the smallest, most podunk town known to man, which that is the town that I'm from. So I know where you're at. I know that there are other people that you just have not quite yet crossed paths with that could be excellent and amazing friends for you. And I also know and trust that your friendships, if they are truly, truly built on a solid foundation, are going to grow and evolve with you. They might not look the same. You might do different things together. You might see each other a little bit less, but I just have to approach this with the intelligence and the faith that if you're bold and you're brave and you choose to open up what's possible for you in those friendships and relationships, the friends that are meant to stick around will follow you. The friends who are not will fall away gracefully and easily, and you'll make space for new people. And I really share some different formulas for how you can approach this, and some things that you can do, and some exercises that you can take on within your existing friendships and your social life as a whole in the book, in order to make this more tangible and more possible. Because let me tell you what, as someone who was never the cool kid, I have and really was clinging onto some very surface level, like elbow rubbing type friendships, or friendships that were rooted in small talk and not like really being deep. I have now a circle of very, very wonderful, thoughtful, um, capable, connected, intentional women all around me. And that feels so beautiful and fulfilling. And if that's available to me, then it's available to anyone. And I want you to have that, because it feels really good also to have that. Do you have like that same experience of how your friendships have evolved?
Oh, definitely. And what's really cool is actually most of my friendships from before like evolved with me. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? It's like we
Yep.
all turned into, it wasn't even necessarily alcohol, it's just alcohol stopped being the cornerstone. So even if
Mhm.
some of them still like drink occasionally or a little bit, like it's just that's not what it's about anymore, you know?
Mhm.
So definitely have evolved there. And then lots of like incredibly growth oriented people in my life that like really we share the same now, like passion for what we're building in our lives and the alcohol free movement, all that kind of stuff. So absolutely. And I think too, it's so funny how like the fear is that you're gonna be the outcast or like lose friends or
Yes.
anything like that. But it's so true. Like, what was the connections? What are they really based on? Like, it's just so flimsy, like you say. So, what about dating? So, I have
Mhm.
personally been with my husband since 2010. So, I don't know anything about this.
Yay.
Literally, the dating apps didn't even exist back then.
Uh-huh.
So, tell us a little bit about how what your experience has been like dating alcohol free and how you kind of made that transition and how another woman can kind of prepare herself.
Mhm. I think that I am so very qualified to talk about this topic because I did not date in high school. I didn't start dating until after I started drinking. So I had zero experience with what it looked like to date and like be vulnerable and alcohol free. Like I didn't have those cute like little high school romances. And so when I stopped drinking at 31 as a single woman, I was like, "Oh my god, this is vulnerable. This is scary," because the only thing I knew how to do was meet for drinks. The way that I knew how to be flirtatious and fun was to have a few drinks in me, and so I really had to be tremendously brave and curious to go explore this world of what dating looked like, and dating apps were definitely in the very early years one of my primary ways for meeting people. And I will say that I think that dating apps are a great tool, especially for people who are newly trying to get their confidence. And please don't take this the wrong way, but it's because there's many fish in the sea and you have direct access to them. So it's like a full world to practice in. And you can go on truly a date every single night or 2 dates a night if you have the stamina for it, because there's so many people who are out there ready to practice with you. And so you can really gain your confidence and footing in dating through using dating apps. And I think it's absolutely possible that you could find a really good match for yourself. But what changed with me as a dater, now alcohol free, is that I quickly realized that my standards for what I desired and what I wanted were very, very different than what drinking Amanda wanted. And I no longer could settle for the Peter Pan bro who I met at the bar. And I personally will still date people who drink, as long as it's not a huge priority. So I've kind of developed a screening process to get a good sense of what that looks like before I go on dates. But I think that the most powerful thing that I really put my foot down around is that I don't go on drinking dates anymore. So if someone wants to meet for drinks, if they, that's just where their creative capacity goes on what a date is, I that's fine because that's a super socially acceptable date. But I then take on the responsibility of saying, you know what, I actually don't drink. How would you feel about meeting for a coffee, or how would you feel about going for a walk? And usually just that, hey, I can't do that, but I'm willing to do this. Is that okay with you? Most people are so overjoyed, and actually it's a breath of fresh air for them to go on this date that isn't in a dark loud room where you're just sitting across the table staring at another person. So my dates in my dating life have been so much more joyful, productive, and actually comfortable on as an alcohol-free woman. I've gone on a lot of great dates and a lot of great dates that didn't go anywhere, but at least we were able to both be vulnerable with each other and both show up as our fullest self, even if that is awkward sometimes. And I think that it's made me a better partner. Well, I know that it's made me a better partner and a better date overall, which was truly, truly surprising.
That's so interesting. And I love how like the standards have changed with like the Peter Pan. That's such a great descriptor of it. I definitely
Mhm.
dated a Peter Pan
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
years before I met my husband. So not only has like your like how the atmosphere and the environment and the screening kind of changed, but like, you just said that, dating someone who drinks is fine as long as it's not like a big part of their lifestyle. What has else changed? Like, what is the thing that you are that therefore looking for? Because that's the
Mhm.
same for me with friendships. Like, I don't
Yes.
need someone to be a total non-drinker that never ever drinks to be your friend. In fact, if that's the only thing we have in common, like that's not deep enough yet for me. You know what I mean? It
Mhm.
needs to go a level beyond that. But like, so I have a different criteria. Like I want someone who's growth oriented and working on themselves and going after their dreams and like living life with, faith over fear, those kinds of things. So what is your new standard when it comes to dating? Like who would be who are you holding space for?
Yes, please send me his number if you hear this description and you know who he is. Um, but it's not that different from friendships, right? You date based on values and similar lifestyles. I think with dating though, I think that sometimes we can get a little too tied up in the specifics. So I try to let the universe take my vision and really just go with values, but it is someone who's growth oriented, someone who, I don't necessarily need someone who's on specifically the same spiritual level or agrees in everything, because that would probably be boring if we're just like yesing each other all the time. But someone who encourages me to be better and wants me to encourage them to do the same, someone who is supportive, and someone we are champions for each other, like I am so much more ambitious and successful as a person than I was as a drinker. And I think that there's an old version of me that would worry that some people would be intimidated by that. And certainly there might be people who are. And so it's really important for me that I find a partnership where even if we're not growing quite at the same level, that we're both really cheering for each other. And but we're also not like dragging each other up some sort of hill. We're not trying to like force feed our values to one another. And I'm really open to what that looks like otherwise. But before, I was just focused on someone who was fun and had a good job. And the things that I had on my list were so superficial. And today they're so much more evolved and open. And yeah, I know that maybe I have met him yet, but I don't think so. But I have true faith that in a level that I didn't have before, that my person is out there and that I'm going to meet them in divine time. And before would have been like, I need to get married. I need to find the person now. And now I'm just like, you know what? It's all going to happen. And I just truly am able to kind of let go of that process, which feels so much more relaxing most of the time.
Well, I love having conversations with you because every time we hang out and talk, like there's that ease about you, that sense of faith that really like spills over into much of what you do. And I'm curious how much of that has also catalyzed your business and like your movement that you're growing of like really having the trust and the guidance from the bigger universe and the spirit behind you type of a thing. And how you've been able to take basically what you experienced yourself and learned and turn it into your career.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I mean, so much of it, all of it. I think that what I teach specifically, like the I guess curriculum that I teach in my work, is built on direct experience of how I now am able to see the world. But my ability to do so, even from that like faith perspective, and to let myself be guided and trust that everything is going to work out, because I'm a control freak at heart, Karolina. Like I like to know the answers, and I like the answer to be now or tomorrow or very, very clear. And through this process of stepping away from alcohol and just stepping more into a more spiritual, a more enlightened place, and enlightened not even from a spiritual perspective, but just releasing some of that control, has allowed me to throw a dream out and allow it to come to me. So many of the things that have happened in my life and career, my ability to attract students and opportunities to be in front of the right students in terms of, just being on a podcast or getting a news feature or something, as to, getting my book agent, to getting a book deal. All of these things have felt very easeful for me. Not that I don't work hard, because I do, but I also don't work as hard as I did as a drinker, where I feel like I was, constantly pushing a boulder uphill. And now I feel like I'm just like going uphill, and that's what's happening. And not that there aren't still things that are hard or frustrating, because there are, but the majority of the time, it just feels like, oh, I'm supposed to be here and everything is working out. And that might sound a little like Pollyanna, but from someone who it used to feel really, really intense to get the things that I wanted, now it just feels, okay, of course that's going to happen. And that feels really good.
Yeah. I I'm curious, like as an author, authors are readers. So
Mhm.
can you mention like one book that really changed things for you? Like to have this perspective, like one spiritual book that, and I know it's
Mhm.
gonna be really hard to pick, but like
Yeah.
just like give us a good recommendation here.
Okay, I'm gonna have to give two because the first one that truly, truly changed me is probably not the first spiritual book I would recommend you dive into, and that's Wayne Dyer's The Power of Intention. But that is the first book that I read at the recommendation of a mentor, and it's a little dense to get through at first. Even now, 8 or 9 years later, every time I go back to read it, I'm like, what's happening in the first few chapters? But it truly did change my life. I think it's a very, very a beautiful book. And then the other one, one of my dearest mentors is Gabby Bernstein. So I think that her book Spirit Junkie really helped me understand what my life could look like if I chose to step away from the alcohol scene. And that was really inspiring for me. So, and she pulls from Wayne Dyer's work as well. So I think I would start with something on the Gabby Bernstein level and then work up to Wayne Dyer. But those are two both really powerful books that have helped me along my way.
Amazing. Well, we can't wait to get your book. Can you tell the listeners where to find it, where to find you?
Absolutely. You can find the book wherever books are sold. Of course, we would love if you support a local retailer, but you can get it on Amazon. And I did read the audiobook, which was super fun. I think that that will be a really impactful way to absorb the information. And I'm everywhere on the internet at Amanda Kuda. And so I would love to connect with you. If anything here resonated or you get the book and you just want to talk, just slide on into my DMs. I'm always there.
Amazing. Well, we'll be sure to include all of that in the show notes and the show links. I've been just so excited on your journey, Amanda. Like we had literally, I think I ditched alcohol at 30, you were 31. Like we met each other around similar times. Like we
Mhm.
launched our businesses at similar times. We got book deals, me a little earlier, you now. Like it's just
Mhm.
incredible to watch like the journey and like have someone who really speaks in a similar way. And it's like, so empowering that there's just so many people who see it from like a different level or a higher level because like it's just not about the alcohol people like
Mhm.
the universe is tapping you on the shoulder and saying hey there's a major growth opportunity for you over here, stop making objections about like whether you're going to have fun or what you're going to do after work. Like it's not about that, you know what I mean? You'll figure all that
Yes.
other stuff out, but it's really this growth journey that you're meant to go on. So I definitely recommend this book to all the listeners and definitely go run out and get your copy as soon as possible. Amanda, thank you so much for your perspective and your light and sharing your wisdom with us
Oh,
today.
thank you, Karolina.